Unfortunately, all Australia will have to pay.
The Assistant Treasurer has the call.
Thank you very much, Speaker. It's great to be able to contribute to this debate, albeit very flawed, the proposition that's been brought forward by the member for North Sydney. The member for North Sydney asserts that the failure of the government to properly manage the budget should be the topic of discussion. It is extraordinary that, in the circumstances of the strength and the resilience of the Australian economy, that the member for North Sydney, who has been prone to come into this place and go anywhere in the country to talk down the economy, that he would choose to do that once more. He wants to talk about confidence, yet every utterance that comes out of his mouth, he talks down the economy. Well, let's have a look at the Australian economy, the resilience of our economy. We are 13% larger today than we were before the global financial crisis. There is no major advanced economy in the world that has grown in that order of magnitude in that period of time. In fact, countries like the UK, they still haven't got back to the starting line. They're in negative territory. Many countries, comparable countries around the world, have experienced consecutive quarters of negative growth. Here in Australia, we continue to move ahead, 21 years of continuous economic growth. When it comes to employment, we have created more than 960,000 jobs since we've been in office. The Leader of the Opposition, he says he's got a plan. He doesn't have a plan, he's got a little blue book. And for some reason, someone in a focus group somewhere told him, whenever you're doing an interview, stick it up under your chin. Well, it doesn't add any economic credibility to someone who his former boss said was economically illiterate. It adds no credibility whatsoever. And the member, the Leader of the Opposition, is out there saying, if we get elected, in 5 years we will deliver 1 million jobs. Well, I've got to point out to him that in just over 5 years, that's what we've delivered. And we had a global financial crisis where, around the world, we are looking at about 30 million jobs having been lost. And here in Australia, we have created almost 1 million jobs in that period. And we did that because we took the right decisions at the right time. We stepped up to the mark. We invested in stimulus activity to keep people in jobs. Leader of the Opposition, we all remember, wasn't even in the chamber. Asleep at the wheel, in fact asleep on the lounge in his office. The biggest economic challenge to face this country in a generation. And where was the Leader of the Opposition? Well, he wasn't the Leader of the Opposition at the time, but he was asleep on the lounge in his office. Didn't even vote on it. So unlike some of his colleagues, like the member for Goldstein, who he runs around when it suits him and says, well, I voted against the stimulus. Well, the Leader of the Opposition can't even say that because he didn't turn up, he didn't vote. And this is the bloke that wants to stand up and ask the Australian people to give him the privilege of managing the Australian economy as the Prime Minister. We have outperformed every major advanced economy, whether it be growth, whether it be employment. Our unemployment rate at 5.5%. In fact, don't listen to me. Listen to the former Prime Minister, John Howard. Former Prime Minister John Howard recently said, we are still fortunate that we have an unemployment rate with a 5 in front of it. I wouldn't have thought that was going to be possible a couple of years ago, and I don't think many people would have. Ringing endorsement from the former Prime Minister John Howard, the man who they say they want to reclaim that economic credibility, the mantle of economic credibility that he once had, as they suggest. Well, he says the Australian economy is doing well. He says that when it comes to overall performance, he says when the current Prime Minister and Treasurer and others tell you that the Australian economy is doing better than most, they're right. They are right, he says. Well, don't listen to the opposition when it comes to the strength of the Australian economy. In fact, you don't even have to listen to us. Listen to the former Prime Minister John Howard, or, more importantly, listen to some independent voices in this debate. Have a look at what the ratings agencies have to say. AAA credit rating from all 3 major global ratings agencies, delivered under this government, reaffirmed in response to our budget handed down last night. Never ever achieved under the former government. So for all of the talk about how good they were as economic managers in government, they couldn't achieve the trifecta of triple A's. We've got it, we've done it, and it's about time it was recognised, because we have managed the Australian economy not just to deliver the sort of strength of performance reflected in those figures, but to make sure that people have jobs and that the economy grows. Let's look at what some other commentators have had to say about the budget. ANZ have said, as was already well known, the deterioration in federal finances has largely been due to lower than expected revenues. Well, as we all know, except for the member for North Sydney, well, he reckons there's some other mysterious explanation other than a deterioration in revenue. ANZ's assessment is that this is a budget broadly appropriate for the economic cycle. The substantial tightening of fiscal policy that would have been required to return the budget to surplus any earlier than outlined tonight would be too damaging to an already somewhat vulnerable Australian economy. Well, there you have it, ANZ. That sounded like a pretty strong endorsement of the budget to me. Don't listen to the member for North Sydney. The member for North Sydney, the man who talks big when it comes to the age of entitlement. The age of entitlement. Well, you know, when he had his chance to confront a measure that we'd taken in relation to trimming the baby bonus for second and subsequent children, well, he got rolled. Maybe the member for Goldstein, when he gets up and gives us his usual contribution, maybe he'd like to tell us whether he was right there behind Joe. Were you right behind Joe? Did you help him out? Or did you get rolled too? You know, if they couldn't make a responsible decision in relation to a modest trimming of the baby bonus, you've got to ask yourself, what hope have they got? What hope have they got? I could go through Westpac. The improvement in the budget position is appropriately gradual over the 4 years. The Commonwealth Government's net debt position remains extremely manageable. And look, it wasn't just Westpac that said that our debt position was manageable. In fact, I'll just go back to former Prime Minister John Howard for one moment. And our debt to GDP ratio, the amount of money we owe to the strength of our economy, is still a lot better than most other countries. In fact, if you look at the budget papers, our net government debt is about an eighth of the average of our comparable economies in the major advanced economies in the world. About an eighth. So when those on the other side come forward and they want to start talking down the economy and they want to start talking about the debt that we're lumbering on future generations, well, just remember that the whole world went through the global financial crisis. That's why it was called the global financial crisis. Right? So you've got to have a look at what happened across the globe. And when you look at what happened across the globe, you can see that we came through stronger than anyone else. We punched through stronger than anyone else. We're 13% larger today than we were then, while others are struggling to get back to where they were, creating jobs and creating more jobs. And now we are investing in the programs of the future. I hear the member for Flinders make a little interjection there, and he's the man who has all of the credibility you'd expect from someone who wrote their PhD on pricing carbon to tackle climate change. And then when he gets a chance, look, at least the member for North Sydney, he went into the shadow cabinet and he put the case. He got rolled, but he put the case. You know, the member for Flinders, well, he doesn't even know what he stands for. He doesn't even know what he stands for. You know, the bloke went through 3 years at three years putting together a thesis. I'd hate to think what he got for a mark, but he put together 3 years of effort. And his conclusion was, if you want to do this, the most effective and efficient way is to price carbon. And you know, most people, they stick their hand up and they run for parliament because they want to make a difference. They want to take their values and they want to enshrine them in the law of the land.
Order.
You know, but some people...
Flinders, order. The minister will resume his seat. The member for Groom.
Well, I'm reluctant to do this, Mr Deputy Speaker, but the reality is the MPI is about the budget, and this stream of personal attacks by the Assistant Treasurer has nothing to do with the MPI.
I thank the member for Groom for his point of order. I was on the point myself of bringing the minister back to the MPI before the House.
That matters that go to carbon pricing are very adequately set out in the budget. And I thank the member for Flinders for his suggestion that this has been an undergraduate contribution. I'll get back to his postgraduate contribution, which was back when he believed in actually doing something to tackle the problems of the planet. But now he's more interested in self-promotion. And that actually means within the Liberal Party that you don't get ahead if you assert the valid view that you tackle climate change by pricing carbon. So he's put his own interests of self-advancement ahead, the duty that each and every one of us in this place has, to bring the values that we believe in, to enshrine them in the laws of the land and to make this country a better place. That's what we've done on this side. But when it comes to economic management, I have to say that for all the facts and figures that the member for North Sydney wants to blurt out, you didn't hear him talk about the tax to GDP ratio. Now, the tax to GDP ratio, well, you look at the size of your economy and what's the percentage of tax the government's collecting as a percentage of the size of the economy. And that is the best measure of the tax burden. It's the best measure of the tax burden. It is considerably lower today than it was when we came to office. It was 23.7% when we came to office. That's what the Howard government was taxing people at. In fact, it's 21.5%. 21.5% in the current year. So they talk about the tax burden as a percentage of the economy. This government is collecting less than 22% of GDP in tax collections. They were collecting almost 24%. And in fact, if we were taxing at the same rate as they were when they left office, we would be in surplus. We'd be in a comfortable surplus. But the reality is that there have been revenue write-downs, and there have been cyclical factors and some structural that we faced. And in terms of some of the structural factors, we've put in place a proposal to tackle some of the profit-shifting activity that's been going on, where big multinationals shift profits into low-tax or no-tax jurisdictions to avoid paying their fair share. Now, I speak to many of these companies, and they point out, they say, this is not a question of morality. We are doing what is legal. And I say, well, I don't think it's very moral. And they say, if you don't think it's very moral, you're the lawmaker, change the laws. Well, you know what? That's what we're proposing, to change the laws so that we can make sure that multinational enterprises that are some of the most profitable enterprises in the globe, that are profiting from economic activity occurring here in Australia, are paying their fair share. Like all of the mums and dads that head off to Penrith Station in my electorate at 5 o'clock in the morning to head into the city for work each day. They pay their fair share of tax. The small business, home-based business in Glenmore Park that's paying their fair share of tax. But these big multinationals, often locating their profits in tax havens or low-tax jurisdictions, avoiding their obligations. We want to stop it. But every time we've brought an amendment into this place, and we've brought $11 billion worth of them, every time we've brought it in, those opposite, what have they done? They voted against it. Because if there's a rort, a rip-off or a loophole, they'll be in there trying to protect it. Any rort, loophole or rip-off, they're in there trying to protect it. But you know what? This goes to a question of values. We believe we've got to crack down on these loopholes, and that's what we're doing. I don't have a lot of time left, and in the time left to me, I must take the opportunity to talk about the high taxing ways of those opposite. And the latest iteration of their high taxing tendencies is this paid parental leave tax. Tony Abbott, a man who he can absolutely be believed on parental leave questions, because when he was a Minister of the Crown, last in office and had a chance to do something, he said, when it comes to parental leave, it'll happen over my dead body. Over my dead body. What a commitment he had to parental leave when he last had a chance. But now he's got this U-Butte Mickey Mouse Rolls-Royce version, which, a woman on $1 million a year can take $75,000 for that period while she's off on leave. $75,000. There are people all around the country that will never earn $75,000 a year. $75,000. And who's going to pay for it? Companies. Remember, this is the mob that told you, oh, it's a great big new tax, and when you tax a big company, then it's going to flow through and it's going to be passed on in higher prices, and we all pay. We all pay. So you don't tax big companies, you actually tax all of us. That's what they told us. But all of a sudden, they're proposing a great big new tax, and you know what? They say it's fully funded. Well, a 1.5% levy on 3,000 companies won't fully fund your program. You're going to have to jack up that tax. or you're going to have to spread it onto more and more people. See the member for Goldstein, body language is a great thing as he starts to have that nervous itch and twitch. He knows that this is a shambolic policy. He knows it's a sham, and if they're going to deliver it, then they're going to have to jack up taxes by more than 1.5% on those